campuses, I don't just say, oh, so-and-so and so-and-so. I have usually a New York Times clip that I refer to. So that I want people to know, if you're gonna come at me, you got to come knowing I got something to back it up. I got a source, I got a reference, I got something. I learned that in SNCC. So, and one last thing is Black Panther Party with the Freedom Schools. It was so interesting to hear that because, of course, the kind of freedom schools we were doing, also run by women, were in Mississippi. And they had been run in the North with countrymen. And so you get that thread that is just this through line of how do you get education to work for people and how do you get them to think critically. So in Mississippi freedom schools, young people are looking at the state constitution in Mississippi in 1964 and are being asked, if you were, who is not included in this? And if you were writing it, what would you put in your state constitution that would cover not just black people, but poor white people, people who are disenfranchised and oppressed? So, I'm ending there. Thank you very much.
Is it possible to hold up the other sessions for 15 minutes or so?
I'm sorry?
Is it possible to hold up the other sessions for 15 minutes or so? It's the 4 o'clock sessions. Is it possible
the 4 o'clock sessions are going to be ongoing now. So we're only going to have a 5-minute discussion, maybe a little more, maybe 8 minutes, but we do need to respect the other presenters as well. And I do apologize to the audience and particularly to the panel. I think it's worthy to have a longer discussion, but we do want to acknowledge those other presenters too. And this is the second large conference that the Avery Research Center has done, and the first one we've done of this size. And I do think that we have learned a lesson too about timing, because these conversations are important and people have many things to say. So please accept my apologies on that. Without any further ado, your questions. What's that? Yeah, how about I do 3 at a time, and I do mean questions and not comments. So yes, and behind you, and I'll do one back there, and then we'll do another round.
I really like hearing about Stevie Wonder and Gary Bartz and Judy Douglas, and my question was basically, are scholars of Black Power taking culture seriously now? Because I look around this room, see Negro Digest, Black World, Bill South here, and Don Lee, and I get the sense that historians have not really tackled those things heads on. They like to bring the PowerPoint together to talk about them in small places. But, one of the best books we have in the culture of Black Power is James Nesbitt's Black Arts. And it's wonderful, and I feel like a lot of times historians see that or layers of even more popular writers. One of the biggest books that you want last year on the culture of Black Power is in white. It's a coffee table book, just pictures of record albums. There's no analysis in it. And I'm thinking, why isn't it historian here? So maybe I'm totally dead wrong on this. If you go back to Vanderbilt's book, it's mostly on culture, but justifiably really was short on politics. Maybe over-emphasize culture. And so obviously we have to argue for the political importance of Black Power, which was a huge way to discredit over the years. But it's culture not getting its due. Even let's see this conference lineup, there's about 5 talks on culture. Everything else is, for the most part, on politics.
I'll take the question behind you.
Could I just ask if people could raise the question rather than giving a large comment, that would probably speed it along.
Thank you all for a great panel. I came to this conversation wondering about the centrality of the Black church and Black Power studies moving forward. So Donna, I was really interested in hearing your commentary. You mentioned briefly the radicalization of the Black church in the North as opposed to the South. That just moved us up to Georgia and have seen all these Black churches celebrating 200+ years. And my question has been, how do you trace the era of self-determination to Black Power as it relates specifically to the radicalization of the Black church in the South?
We've got one in the back, yes.
Very quickly. When we speak of Black Power, we're speaking about the creation of consciousness based upon the identity of Black people, which is more we're just speaking about Black people just having positions in power, whether it's economics, politics, and so forth. And one last thing, how do we get to the concept of cultural imperialism? I mean, not to offend anybody in this room, I don't mean to do that, but it's hot outside, it's the South, and every time I see events such as this, I always see people wearing suits and ties, and I just don't understand the common sense behind how a suit and tie fits in with a sense of identity. I mean, counter to the cultural imperialism, we say this is considered to be proper. That is considered to be what looks nice, instead of creating our own definition based upon having things that are more conducive for health.
Thank you.
Amen on culture.
I agree. Quickly, I would just say, I co-taught a class on Black aesthetics with Evie Shockley last semester, and there's a lot of work, good work and historical work being done by literary scholars, and I wouldn't say it's not historical work because it's not being done by historians. I also think that this parsing of culture versus political culture and politics is a problem. You can't separate them. And there's a reason why our books draw their titles from culture. And in my own book, I'd like to think that I incorporated it in a profound way. I didn't discuss it in terms of aesthetic theory as material culture. I discussed it as a living culture related to political mobilization. But that said, we need more, and we would love to see more cultural and intellectual histories. And I think part of Black Power scholarship, just like the movement, changed the definitions of genre. And I think that's needed in order to write about aesthetics.
I'm speaking as somebody who is older and who went through 3 years in only galas in long African traditional dress. So as coming from that, I will say that I no longer look at somebody's appearance and assume that they will come out with a certain position. I no longer assume that because they have straight hair, they will do a certain thing. I no longer assume that if they don't, I don't do any of that anymore. And that's only because I've gotten older and probably, you know, oh, hello, it's smarter, maybe smarter too. For me, it's, you know, whatever makes you comfortable and smarter, yeah.
Can I say something just very quickly about the Black church? I just want to say thank you so much for that comment, and I think that's one area that really needs research. I learned about Pentecostalism from writing about the Panthers. Everyone was a Pentecostal, and I had to learn about it to understand how they talked about politics. So, from what I know from Panther reunions, it was only in the North that you saw Black churches taking breakfast programs, and that's another part of the history of Black Panthers in the South that I think has to do with state repression. But I think that that's a central, the Black church is a central institution, and especially Southern Baptists and Pentecostals were important to the Black Power movement.
I'm going to take 3 more questions. 2, and do I have a third? Don't make me raffle it off. Okay. Please.
First of all, I wanted to regard to the slide. It's not Vernon Moore. His name is Cecil Moore. He was one in Philadelphia. He was one of my political godfathers, and the thing is, well, the first godfathers is that he represents that nexus that I mentioned at some point about the shift from the civil rights movement to the human rights movement, and he was very crucial in my life in terms of challenging at that point. Out of the Black Power movement, also we have, even to this day, political prisoners, prisoners of war, and exiles, and there has been no substantive discussion about that, especially Jamil Ali, former chair of Student Outlaw Coordinating Committee, having been a member of the Atlanta Project, a SNCC, which drafted the position papers, which provided the theoretical underpinnings for the call for Black Power.
Now, I didn't say there was some potential, so we don't want to get into that, Judy.
And so my challenge to the group is that you Google the Atlanta Project position papers in order to understand the emergence of the call for Black Power and the definition of Black Power as it was set forth.
And only because the prerogative of the person sitting on the panel, there is much contention about that, and many of us who were incident have some concerns about that position. So, just
which is all the more reason why you should study it.
Next question. Can we have the question here and then the one here?
My question had to do with how do you begin your research or frame Black Power around the story of Albert Elwood. Thank you. I have heard that.
Thank you, Nat, for thinking about actually her question. She said, but others as well. When we think about the timeline of think about African American history, is it fair to say that we're talking about long Black freedom struggles that began in the first enslaved person comes to these shores, evolves over time, and then so gets out of this long civil rights idea of long Black power, all this juncture that we're talking about. Can we start with that premise? Is that a useful premise to start from and then build from there? Do you all use that premise when you teach African Americans?
I don't use that premise primarily because it was a really engaging critique that was written by Sundiata Sheshwar and Clarence Lang called The Long Civil Rights Movement as Vampire. But essentially what they argue is the problem with that is that movements are organic, and we want to respect the boundaries of the way that movements grow, develop, shape, so on and so forth. So it's more so what Hasan was suggesting, where we can identify these things that people organize around and understand that even though the people in Montgomery may not have been aware of the Jim Crow car protests at the turn of the century in 1900, 1901, they're organizing around the same issue, and that's what gives these, creates some continuity in the way that we talk about the freedom struggle. For me, 1865 is a line of demarcation because African Americans for the civil rights and black power movement are fighting to reclaim the rights that they won and then lost in the immediate aftermath of emancipation. So 1865 becomes critical in at least my conception, I think you would agree, Doc, of the long freedom struggle. Thanks for the clarification on Cecil Moore. I think that what Hasan spoke to, and certainly Donna, is the problem that we want to break out of the mold of talking about from civil rights to black power. Judy Richardson spoke to this very eloquently. It's civil rights and black power in their concurrent movements. Peniel talks about black power as the movement with no name. And just because it takes the media till 1966 to label it, doesn't mean it wasn't vibrant and a part of those earlier struggles.
I'm going to do very briefly 2 final questions.
But I didn't have my question answered. I was asking about Robert.
Yeah, Robert F. Williams is a complicated figure. When we think about where to locate him, if we use sort of the normative narrative of what civil rights is. Because he doesn't, in other words, if we use what sort of the civil rights movement traditionally conceived, he doesn't really fit. He's talking about armed self-defense in 1959, 1958, 1960, Negroes with guns. So he doesn't fit how we would normally conceptualize that. He doesn't, I understand, he's also dealing with sort of an international component. That makes him hard to pin down if we just think about civil rights conventionally. If we also just think about black power conventionally, he doesn't quite fit either because he stands somewhat before what we would identify as the black power era, and then he's gone. That being said, that doesn't mean that he doesn't belong as a part of the pantheon of people who are engaged in struggle. Until we can understand how he fits, and our good friend Tim Dyson, writes has a biography on him and talks about the roots of black power. I mean, I wouldn't tie it to Robert F. Williams. He's a reflection of an expression of African American organizing that has these deep roots coming out of the South. But at the same time, he's connected to the NAACP, the most traditional of all civil rights organizations. So I would say the reason why he sort of seems pulled out of time is because he doesn't fit the way we have been framing and understanding civil rights and black power. But once we reframe and recast that analysis, then suddenly we'll begin to see that Robert F. Williams does not stand out, but that he stands among so many others who have also been misunderstood and forgotten and ignored.
And that'll be the last question.
Very quickly, Dr. Jeffries, you spoke about how scholars have more or less labeled black power as somewhat of a rupture from the black freedom struggle, and civil rights being more congruent with the long freedom struggle. I was just wondering if you could expound on that.
I mean, I think it goes to some of what Donna Murch was talking about earlier, is that, you have this bad 60s, good 60s, right? I mean, we have, good civil rights organizing, good African American protests, and then you got black folk behaving badly, right? And that becomes black power. But there is much more, although the black power era, so the classical phase, if you will, is clearly distinct. And it's important to make the distinctions between these different moments of organizing and activity. I mean, we have to make these distinctions. We just don't want to see everything as one single current. I mean, there are definite distinctions, but at the same time, we can't dismiss sort of the evolution of people and the connections. Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture is a perfect example. We can't like Stokely Carmichael in 1961 when he was a freedom rider and then hate him during the Meredith March in 1966 when he's calling for black power. It's the same person. We have to understand the experiential evolution of his politics, just as we have to understand the experiential evolution and ideological evolution of people over time. then suddenly we see that black power, what's going on among African American organizing in 1968 and 1970 is different than what's going on in 1960, but it's building on and evolving from, rather than radically breaking away from. And in many instances, it's actually reflecting back to a period before the 50s and 60s, and drawing upon earlier traditions, and that's why it resonates with an older generation in places that we normally don't think of as having a particular brand of radical black politics.
I just want to say quickly, there's a wonderful historiography that's emerging on the New Negro movement and on the Garvey movement in the South, grassroots Garveyism. Many of the people that become active in the Bay Area are migrants from Louisiana, and their parents and grandparents were Garveyites. So that's an example of a specific, long thread that we can trace that's both organizational and, as I was talking about it, non-programmatic. Longer durée histories looking at armed self-defense and kind of autonomous forms of black organizing, particularly in the rural South, I think is a research program that's needed to look at this variation geographically.
3 sentences from me. I just wanted to mention there is literature that deals with political prisoners. I mean, we certainly talk about political prisoners in liberated territory, but there are 2 scholars right now, one of them is sitting at this table, who are working on problems associated with mass incarceration. Robert Chase's work is groundbreaking. And then there's also Heather Thompson at Temple University. It looks like I'm getting some peach cobbler. So, on top of it. But I just wanted to mention there is this very important literature that's out there, very vibrant literature that people can access on political prisoners.
Thank you for this incredible panel. I have a plea to all of you, as an act of solidarity, to take this conference going forward from here, but to do one other final act of solidarity here in Charleston, which is to go to these final panels. I know it's Saturday afternoon. I know it's a long conference. I know this went on too long, but please do go to the other panels. Support them. They're at the Spirit Center and the Education Center, and we know that's a walk as well, but I think that will be good. Thank you. Yeah.